The hushed whispers of the city's elite felt like a physical force, pressing in on Sarah Jenkins from all sides. Each clink of a wineglass, each low murmur of conversation seemed to underscore how utterly out of place she was. She stood at the entrance of the Grand View, a cathedral of modern cuisine, where the gleam of polished silver and the stark white of linen tablecloths made her feel like a smudge on a masterpiece. Her worn floral dress, a relic from a life before motherhood, felt paper-thin under the soft, judgmental glow of the recessed lighting. Tugging at her hand was her son, Leo, a brilliant 5-year-old splash of color in this monochrome world. His faded superhero t-shirt, a defiant banner of childhood innocence. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of anxiety. She could feel the eyes on them, the subtle shifts in posture, the raised eyebrows that communicated a single devastating question: what are they doing here? And then she saw him. Across the expanse of deep pile carpet and calculated elegance, Daniel Thorne stood up from his table. He was exactly as his profile picture had suggested, only more so, tall, distinguished in a tailored suit that probably cost more than her rent for 3 months, with an air of effortless authority that commanded the room. For a terrifying second their eyes met, and Sarah's breath hitched. This was it, the moment of dismissal, the polite, pitying smile before he made an excuse and vanished, leaving her and Leo stranded in this sea of quiet condescension. But to understand the sheer, heart-stopping terror and hope of that single moment, you have to understand the 48 hours that led to it. 2 days earlier, Sarah's life had been its usual relentless rhythm. Her name, Sarah Jenkins, felt as ordinary as the tireless cadence of her days, an invisible cog in the vast, unforgiving machine of the city. Her world was a carefully mapped triangle between her tiny apartment, Leo's preschool, and the sterile cubicle of her modest office job. The alarm at 5:30 in the morning was a cruel siren, pulling her from a sleep that was never quite deep enough. Then came the frantic, loving choreography of waking Leo, of negotiating over which superhero shirt was appropriate for the day, of making toast and packing a lunchbox with painstaking care. The journey on public transport was a blur of anonymous faces, a daily testament to her own invisibility. Her evenings were a whirlwind of homework, dinner, bath time, and the sacred ritual of bedtime stories, where she would lose herself in tales of dragons and heroes, finding a brief respite in a world far from her own. There was no room for anything else, no time, no energy, and certainly no money for a personal life. Yet a flicker of something, hope, maybe, or just sheer desperate loneliness, had made her accept the blind date. Her friend Jessica had been insistent. "He's a good man, Sarah. A CEO, but not one of those arrogant types. You deserve a night out, a real one." The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. The restaurant, the Grand View, sounded like a place from another planet. The anxiety over the cost of a babysitter alone had kept her up at night, a constant nagging worry for a single mother who budgeted every single dollar with the precision of a bomb disposal expert. But she had allowed herself to dream. She had borrowed a dress from Jessica, a simple floral print that made her feel for a fleeting moment like a woman again, not just a mother, not just an employee. It hung in her closet like a promise. Then, just hours before the date, the phone rang. It was the cruelest twist of fate. Her babysitter, a sweet high school girl from down the hall, had a family emergency. The words tumbled out, apologetic and sincere, but each one felt like a hammer blow to Sarah's fragile hope. Her carefully constructed evening, her dream of a few hours of adult conversation, crumbled into dust. With a sigh heavy enough to deflate her entire being, she sat on her bed, the borrowed dress mocking her from the closet door. She composed a text to a man whose name she barely remembered, her fingers hovering over the send button. The easy thing to do was to cancel, to retreat back into the comforting, isolating cocoon of her life. Something came up. Can we reschedule? But a sudden, uncharacteristic impulse took over, an impulse for honesty. What did she have to lose? He was a stranger, a CEO from a world that would never intersect with hers again, so she typed the truth. "I'm so sorry." Her thumb shook slightly as she wrote, "My babysitter cancelled last minute, and I can't leave my son alone. I completely understand if you'd like to reschedule, or perhaps not at all." She braced herself for the inevitable polite dismissal, the understanding but firm closure. "No problem. Another time, perhaps." A text that really meant never. If you've ever felt that impossible choice between your responsibilities and a chance for happiness, you know the feeling that washed over Sarah. If your heart is beating for her right now, give this story a like so we know you're with her on this journey. She tossed the phone onto her bed, not wanting to watch the screen. But a moment later it buzzed. Her heart leaped into her throat. She picked it up, her eyes scanning the words that would surely seal her fate. But the message wasn't a cancellation. It wasn't a lecture about priorities. It was 4 sentences that defied every social convention she had ever known. "Please don't cancel, Sarah. Is it okay if you bring him along? We can just have a casual dinner, nothing formal. It would be a pleasure to meet your son." Sarah read the message 3 times, then a 4th. Disbelief warred with a hesitant surge of gratitude. A CEO was inviting her 5-year-old son on their first date. To a 5-star restaurant. It was insane. A social catastrophe waiting to happen. Every sensible part of her brain screamed at her to decline, to save herself the inevitable humiliation. But there was an unmistakable sincerity in his words, a simple kindness that cut through her cynicism. She looked over at Leo, who was carefully arranging his action figures on the floor, creating a battle between good and evil. He was her whole world. And this stranger, this powerful man, didn't see him as an obstacle. He saw him as a person to be met. With a deep breath and a silent prayer that Leo would be on his best behavior, she typed back a single word. "Okay." The journey downtown felt surreal. The grimy, screeching subway car gave way to gleaming glass towers that pierced the evening sky. Leo's face was pressed against the window, his eyes wide with wonder at the city lights. "Are we going to a castle, Mummy?" he asked, his voice full of awe. "Something like that, sweetie," she replied, her own stomach twisting into knots. Each step from the subway station to the restaurant's imposing entrance felt like walking a tightrope. A doorman, in a ridiculously ornate uniform, eyed Leo's light-up sneakers with a flicker of disdain. The maitre d's smile was professionally perfect, but his eyes darted from Sarah to Leo and back again, a silent calculation running behind his polite facade. Which brought her back to this moment, standing frozen at the entrance, the entire restaurant a witness to her social transgression. Daniel Thorne was walking toward them. He moved with a quiet confidence that made people turn to look. He wasn't smiling, not yet. His expression was one of calm, unreadable assessment. Sarah's hands grew clammy. She instinctively pulled Leo a little closer, a primal urge to protect him from the judgment she felt was about to rain down upon them. This was a mistake, a terrible, terrible mistake. He was going to take one look at Leo's superhero shirt, at her second-hand dress, and the illusion of whatever kindness he had shown over text would shatter. He stopped a few feet in front of them, his gaze finally settling on her, and then, slowly, moving down to the small boy at her side. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Sarah opened her mouth to apologize, to explain, to somehow undo this whole catastrophic decision. But before she could speak, he took a step forward, his eyes never leaving hers, and then he did something so unexpected, so utterly disarming, that the entire whispering restaurant seemed to fall silent. The world seemed to slow, the low hum of polite conversation and the clinking of fine crystal fading into a distant, muffled buzz. Sarah stood frozen, Leo's small hand clutched tightly in hers. Every imagined judgment from the room's wealthy patrons pressing down on her like a physical weight. But her eyes were fixed on one man, Daniel Thorne, who had risen from his table with the easy grace of someone who commanded every room he entered, did something so utterly unexpected it shattered every one of Sarah's carefully constructed defenses. He knelt. Right there, on the plush, wine-colored carpet of the Grandview, a man in a suit that likely cost more than her rent for 6 months lowered himself without a moment's hesitation, bringing his world down to the level of a 5-year-old boy in a faded superhero t-shirt. His eyes, a warm and surprising shade of hazel, met Leo's, and they held no trace of condescension or impatience. They held only a gentle, focused curiosity. "You must be Leo," he said, his voice a low, pleasant baritone that cut through the restaurant's ambient noise. He extended a hand, not to Sarah, but to her son. "It's a real honor to meet you. I'm Daniel." Leo, who usually hid behind Sarah's leg in the presence of strangers, seemed momentarily stunned. He looked from the outstretched hand to the man's kind face and then up at his mother, a silent question in his eyes. Sarah gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod, her throat too tight to form words. Leo hesitantly placed his small hand in Daniel's much larger one. "I like your shirt," Daniel continued, his smile genuine as he gave Leo's hand a respectful shake. "Is that Captain Valiant?" Leo's eyes widened. "You know Captain Valiant?" he whispered, his shyness dissolving into pure, unadulterated excitement. "Of course," Daniel said, a soft chuckle in his voice. "He's the bravest of them all. He always protects people who can't protect themselves." Sarah watched the exchange, her heart performing a slow, painful ache in her chest. It wasn't just kindness, it was respect. He wasn't humoring a child, he was engaging a person. In that one simple gesture, Daniel Thorne had seen her son, truly seen him in a way most of the world never bothered to. As he finally rose and turned his warm gaze to her, Sarah felt a blush creep up her neck, a mixture of embarrassment and a profound, overwhelming gratitude that left her breathless. "Sarah," he said, his smile deepening, "I'm so glad you came." The dinner that followed was a surreal experience. The waiter, a stiff man with a professionally blank expression, pulled out a chair for her, and Daniel subtly guided another to the perfect height for Leo, asking for a booster seat without making it seem like an inconvenience. He spoke to the staff with a quiet authority that was firm but respectful, and when the menus came, he didn't watch with amusement as Sarah's eyes widened at the prices. Instead, he leaned in conspiratorially toward Leo. "Leo, my friend," he murmured, "I have it on good authority that the chef here makes the best macaroni and cheese in the entire city, but it's a secret item not on the menu. Do you think we should test that theory?" Leo's enthusiastic nod was all the answer needed. Throughout the meal, Sarah found herself slowly uncoiling. She had been so braced for disaster, for Leo to spill something, to speak too loudly, to be the glaringly obvious imperfection in this pristine world. And while Leo was still a 5-year-old, he did drop his fork once and his inside voice occasionally wavered. Daniel never once flinched. He seamlessly wove Leo into their conversation, asking him about his day at kindergarten, listening with rapt attention to a long meandering story about a drawing of a dinosaur, and occasionally catching Sarah's eye with a look of shared, gentle amusement. They talked about her job, about the city, about the simple, mundane things that made up her life. He listened in a way that made her feel fascinating, as if the details of her daily bus commute were a captivating narrative. It was in a quiet lull, as Leo was diligently focusing on a piece of bread, that the atmosphere shifted. Leo looked up at Daniel, his brow furrowed with the serious logic of a child. "Do you have a little boy?" he asked. Sarah's breath caught. "Leo, honey, that's not—" But Daniel held up a hand, stopping her gentle reprimand. A shadow passed over his features, a flicker of something so deep and painful it was like watching a crack appear in a flawless statue. He put his fork down, his gaze turning inward for a long moment. When he looked back at them, the easy warmth in his eyes had been replaced by a raw, aching vulnerability. "No, Leo," he said softly, his voice lower than before. "I don't have a son, but I do have a daughter. Her name is Emily." "Is she here?" Leo asked, his curiosity piqued. Daniel shook his head slowly, a sad, faint smile touching his lips. "No, she lives with her mother. I don't get to see her very much." Sarah remained silent, sensing this was a sacred, fragile space. She could feel the story behind the words, the weight of years of regret. "I used to be a very different man," Daniel confessed, his eyes now fixed on Sarah, a silent plea for understanding in their depths. "I thought that my job, my ambition, I thought building an empire was the most important thing. I thought that's what a father was supposed to do, provide. I told myself I was doing it all for her, for my family." He let out a short, bitter laugh that held no humor. "But I was never there. I missed her first steps because I was closing a deal in another country. I missed her first school play because I was in a board meeting that ran late. I missed everything. He paused, taking a steadying breath. My wife, she tried to tell me, but I didn't listen. By the time I finally realized that the empire I was building was cold and empty, it was too late. She'd left, and she'd taken the only part of it that ever truly mattered. He looked down at his hands, resting on the fine linen tablecloth, as if seeing them for the first time. So now Emily is 10 years old and she's mostly a stranger to me, a collection of photographs and painful, awkward phone calls. He finally lifted his gaze back to Sarah, and she saw the glint of unshed tears in his eyes. When you texted me today, he said, his voice thick with emotion, and told me you had to cancel because of your son, my first thought wasn't annoyance, it was a gut punch. I realized you were about to make the right choice, the one I failed to make 1,000 times over. You were choosing him. His eyes drifted to Leo, who was now quietly coloring on the back of a paper placemat the waiter had thoughtfully provided. Watching you two tonight, Daniel continued, his voice barely a whisper. The way you look at him, the way his whole world is right here with you. It's the most beautiful and painful thing I've seen in years. It's a reminder of everything I threw away. But it's also... He trailed off, searching for the right word. It's a beacon. It's proof that what I'm trying to find my way back to, it's real. It exists. The opulence of the restaurant, the perfectly folded napkins, the silent waiters, it all faded away. In its place was just this man, stripped bare of his power and wealth, revealing a core of profound loneliness and a desperate yearning for redemption. Sarah felt an unexpected wave of empathy wash over her, so powerful it almost knocked the air from her lungs. This wasn't a CEO on a date with a woman from a different world. This was a father lost and broken, speaking to a mother who understood in her bones the fierce, unconditional love he was grieving. Instead of pulling away from her messy, complicated, beautiful reality, Daniel had leaned into it, finding not a burden, but a reflection of his deepest hopes. The date, which she had dreaded as a potential exercise in humiliation, had become something else entirely. A confession, a connection, a quiet and unexpected meeting of two profoundly lonely souls in the heart of a city that never slept. As they left the restaurant an hour later, stepping back into the cool night air, Sarah realized she hadn't just been on a date. She had witnessed the beginning of a man's quiet, desperate attempt to find his way back home. The world of Daniel Thorne had once been measured in stock market tickers, quarterly reports, and the silent, sterile echo of his penthouse apartment. Now, it was measured in the number of skips a flat grey stone could make across the surface of a pond. No, Daniel, not like that, Leo said, with the grave seriousness only a 5-year-old could muster. He held up a perfectly chosen stone, its edges worn smooth by the water. You have to flick your wrist like... Pew! He mimed the motion, his small arm a blur of determination. Daniel, in a charcoal grey cashmere sweater that cost more than Sarah's monthly rent, crouched down trying to copy the movement. His first attempt sent the stone plopping into the water a few feet from the bank with a pathetic plunk. Leo sighed, a dramatic, world-weary sound. Sarah, watching from a nearby bench with a thermos of lukewarm coffee, couldn't suppress a smile. It was a sight so beautifully incongruous it felt like a dream, the titan of industry, the man whose decisions could sway markets, being patiently schooled in the art of stone skipping by her son. Their relationship hadn't so much blossomed as it had quietly taken root in the soil of these simple, unscripted moments. The opulence of the grand view had given way to the humble reality of their lives. Afternoons were for parks, weekends for trips to the zoo or the science museum, where Daniel seemed just as fascinated by the exhibits as Leo. Their dates were no longer about proving something to the world, but about discovering a world within each other. That evening, the scene shifted to the cozy, slightly cluttered warmth of Sarah Jenkins's apartment. The air smelled of baked chicken and the faint, sweet scent of Leo's crayons. Daniel sat at the small kitchen table, a place designed for 2, maybe 3 at a squeeze, his long legs folded awkwardly underneath. Spread before him wasn't a business proposal, but Leo's math homework. 7 + 4, Leo mumbled, staring at the paper as if it held the secrets of the universe. He held up 7 fingers, then slowly, one by one, added 4 more, his tongue sticking out from the corner of his mouth in concentration. 11, he declared triumphantly. That's my man, Daniel said, his voice softer than Sarah had ever heard it on that first night. He high-fived Leo, a genuine, crinkling smile reaching his eyes. Daniel Thorne wasn't just present, he was engaged, invested in the small victory of a first-grade math problem. Sarah watched them from the stove, her heart performing a complicated dance of joy and fear. The joy was a brilliant, blinding light. Seeing Daniel here, in her home, fitting so seamlessly into the fabric of her life, was a miracle she hadn't dared to wish for. He never made her feel small for her worn-out couch or mismatched plates. Instead, he treated her home like a sanctuary, a place of warmth he had been starved for. But beneath the joy, a cold current of fear ran deep. This couldn't be real. Men like Daniel Thorne didn't end up with women like Sarah Jenkins. She was a chapter in his life, she told herself, a heartwarming detour on his path back to his own world. Sooner or later, he would remember who he was, and she would be left with the silence and the beautiful, painful memories. Later, after Leo was asleep, tucked into his bed with a story read in Daniel's deep, calming voice, the two of them sat on the couch. A comfortable silence settled between them, the kind that doesn't need to be filled. "You're good with him," Sarah said quietly, tracing the pattern on a throw pillow. "Really good." Daniel looked over at her, his expression unreadable for a moment. "He makes it easy. He's pure. He doesn't care about my portfolio or my last quarter's earnings. He just wants to know if I can build a good Lego tower." He paused, his gaze turning inward. "He's teaching me things I forgot I was supposed to know. How to be here, just here." He was shedding the skin of the man he used to be, layer by painful layer. The ambition that had driven him to ruin his marriage and alienate his daughter Emily was slowly being replaced by a yearning for connection. He saw in Sarah's unwavering devotion to Leo the very thing he had failed to give his own child. Every bedtime story he read to Leo was a rehearsal for a future he desperately hoped to have with Emily. Every scraped knee he helped clean was an atonement. Sarah and Leo were not just his present, they were his path to redemption. But his old world had not disappeared. It lurked at the edges, casting long shadows into their sunlit patch of happiness. One afternoon at the park, Daniel's phone buzzed incessantly. He ignored it for a while, completely absorbed in pushing Leo on the swings. But the buzzing was persistent, aggressive. Finally, with an apologetic glance at Sarah, he answered it. His transformation was instantaneous and jarring. The soft, patient man disappeared, replaced by the CEO. His voice dropped, became sharp, clinical. "No, that's unacceptable. Liquidate the position. I don't care what the projections say. Henderson is getting nervous. I want it done by market close." Sarah watched, her stomach tightening. A well-dressed couple on a nearby path slowed their pace, their eyes widening in recognition. The woman whispered something to the man, who nodded, his gaze lingering on Daniel, then flicking dismissively over to Sarah and Leo. The judgment was silent but palpable. What is a man like that doing with them? Daniel hung up, the tension draining from his shoulders as he turned back to them, but the shift had already happened. The invisible wall between their worlds had become visible, shimmering in the afternoon air. "Sorry about that," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "It's okay," Sarah replied, her own voice sounding small. "It's your job." But the fear was back, coiling in her gut. She was a distraction, a novelty. When the pressures of his real life mounted, their little world of parks and homework would be the first thing to go. That night, she lay awake. The memory of the couple's stare burned into her mind. She loved the man who taught her son to skip stones, but she was terrified of the man who liquidated positions without a second thought. Were they even the same person? And which one would ultimately win? A few days later, Daniel was scrolling through his phone, a rare moment of idleness, while Leo was engrossed in a cartoon. He lingered on a photo he had taken. It wasn't a picture of a sunset over a city skyline or a celebratory dinner at a fancy restaurant. It was a picture of 3 stones sitting on his marble countertop at home. One large, one medium, one small. Leo had declared them the Thorne-Jenkins family and insisted Daniel take them home. It was ridiculous, sentimental, and it was the most precious thing he owned. On an impulse he didn't fully understand, he posted the photo to his private, rarely used social media account, the one connected to old friends and family contacts, with a simple caption, "The most valuable assets I've acquired all year." He thought nothing more of it, but hundreds of miles away, a woman named Catherine, a mutual friend of Daniel and his ex-wife, saw the post. It was so out of character, so gentle. She had heard whispers that Daniel was seeing someone, but this was different. This felt like a fundamental shift. She hesitated for a moment, then forwarded the image to his ex-wife, Eleanor, with a single line of text. "Thought you might want to see this. He seems different." The seed had been planted, radiating outwards from the quiet intimacy of Sarah's world, beginning a chain of events that no one could have predicted. The tension in Daniel culminated a week later. He received an embossed invitation in the mail. The annual shareholders' gala, the pinnacle of his corporate calendar. A night of fake smiles, high-stakes networking, and reinforcing the impenetrable image of Thorne Industries. In previous years, he'd attended alone, a solitary shark in a tank of other sharks. This year, his first immediate thought was of Sarah. He wanted her there by his side, a beacon of authenticity in a sea of artifice. He brought it up that night, his voice casual, but Sarah could hear the underlying hesitation. "There's this event, a company thing. It's black tie, a bit stuffy, but I was wondering if you'd come with me." Sarah's heart stopped. It was the collision she had been dreading. Her worn floral dress against a backdrop of couture gowns. Her simple, honest conversation against practiced corporate pleasantries. She pictured the judging eyes, the whispered questions. She would be an exhibit, a curiosity. Daniel Thorne's working-class project. "Daniel, she started, wrapping her arms around herself, a familiar gesture of protection. "I don't have anything to wear, I wouldn't fit in." "We'll get you something," he said, missing the deeper fear in her words. "And you'll fit in because you're with me. Sarah, I want you there." He saw it as a beginning, a merging of their worlds. But for Sarah, it felt like an ending. The end of their safe private bubble and the beginning of a public test she was sure she was destined to fail. The gala was in 2 weeks. And as she looked at Daniel's hopeful face, she felt a profound sense of dread, because she knew that whatever happened on that night, nothing between them would ever be the same. The change in Daniel Thorne did not announce itself with a trumpet blast. It was quieter, a subtle shift in the tectonic plates of his character that began to send tremors through the world he had so meticulously built. In the boardroom of Thorne Industries, a place that had once been his Colosseum, the gladiators, his ambitious vice presidents, were the first to notice. During a tense negotiation over a new acquisition, where the old Daniel would have gone for the jugular, employing surgical cruelty to exploit a competitor's weakness, this new Daniel paused. He listened. He looked at the man across the table, a rival CEO named Marcus Vance, whose company was faltering, and saw not a mark but a man drowning. "We can acquire the assets for pennies on the dollar, Daniel," hissed his chief financial officer, smelling blood in the water. "We can crush them." Daniel looked at the projections, then back at Marcus Vance's pale, drawn face. He thought of Sarah, scrubbing a stain from Leo's shirt. Her expression one of focused determination, not defeat. He thought of what it felt like to be at the bottom, looking up. "No," Daniel said, the words soft but carrying the weight of granite. "We're not going to crush him." He turned to Marcus. "Let's talk about a merger, Marcus, one that preserves your key staff and gives you an honorable exit. Your people deserve that." A stunned silence fell over the room. His team stared at him as if he had started speaking a foreign language. It wasn't business. It was decency. And for Daniel Thorne, it was a revolution. This new frequency began to radiate outward. Word of the merciful merger, as it became known in their insular corporate circle, traveled. But the more potent evidence of his transformation came from sightings of him outside the office. Jessica, his ex-wife, first heard about it from a mutual friend, Amelia, who had called her, her voice buzzing with a kind of breathless disbelief. "I saw Daniel," Amelia had said over the phone. "At the city park, on a Tuesday afternoon." Jessica had scoffed. "Let me guess. Closing a deal on the carousel?" The bitterness was an old familiar friend. "No, Jessica, he was different," Amelia insisted. "He was with a woman and a little boy. They were skipping stones at the pond. He was laughing. I mean, really laughing from the gut. The kind of laugh I haven't heard from him since before. Well, you know." The words hung in the air between them. Before the company became his only child, before Emily became a secondary concern, Jessica had dismissed it, another fleeting phase. But then Amelia sent a photo she had taken discreetly from a distance. It showed Daniel, his suit jacket off, his tie loosened, kneeling by the water's edge. His face, turned in profile, was not the tense, calculating mask she knew so well. It was open, relaxed, hand alight with a joy that was so foreign it was almost unrecognizable. Beside him was a woman with kind eyes and a small boy who was gesturing wildly, clearly explaining the profound physics of a perfect skip. That night, Jessica couldn't sleep. She found herself scrolling through a shared family cloud account she hadn't opened in years, a digital graveyard of Christmases and birthdays past. Tucked among the old staged photos were a few new ones Daniel must have uploaded. There he was, sitting on the floor of a modest apartment, helping the little boy, Leo, with what looked like a school project made of macaroni and glue. There was another of him and the woman, Sarah, sharing a simple meal at a small kitchen table, their heads close together, smiling. There were no yachts, no black tie galas, no symbols of the empire he had built. There was only life, a real, messy, beautiful life. She thought of her last conversation with 10-year-old Emily. "Does Dad ever ask about my soccer games?" Emily had asked, her voice small, trying so hard to sound casual. The question was a tiny knife in Jessica's heart. For years, her primary role had been to protect Emily from the disappointment of a father who was a ghost in her life, a signature on a birthday card, a voice on a rushed holiday phone call. Her anger at Daniel had been a shield for them both. But looking at the photo of him on his knees by the pond, she felt a crack in that shield. For the first time, she saw not the man who had failed them, but a man who was learning how to be present. The man in these pictures, he might ask about a soccer game. He might even show up. With a trembling hand, she picked up her phone. Her finger hovered over his name. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. Taking a deep, ragged breath, she pressed the call button. Daniel was helping Sarah with the dishes when his phone buzzed. He saw the name, Jessica, and his heart seized. "I have to take this," he said, his voice suddenly tight. He stepped into the living room, his hands shaking. "Hello? Daniel?" Jessica's voice was strained, brittle. Amelia told me she saw you." He closed his eyes. He didn't make excuses. He didn't defend his past. He just spoke the truth, a truth he had learned from Sarah. "Jessica, I know I have no right to ask you for anything. I failed you and I failed Emily. I spent years building things that don't matter, and I let the only thing that did fall apart. I live with that every single day. If you're calling to tell me to stay away, I'll understand." There was a long pause. He could hear her breathing, a shaky inhale. "Is it real, Daniel? This change?" "I hope so," he said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "I'm trying. I'm learning what it means to just be there." He thought of Leo's hand in his, of Sarah's unwavering belief in him. "There's so much I need to make right. Most of all, with Emily." Another silence. Then the words that would change everything. "She has a piano recital in 2 weeks," Jessica said softly. "She's been asking to visit you for a while now. I was thinking maybe she could come for the weekend, for her first extended visit." The dam broke. A single, hot tear traced a path down Daniel's cheek. "Yes," he whispered, the word a prayer. "Of course. Anything. Thank you, Jessica." The day of Emily's arrival felt like the single most important day of Daniel's life. His sprawling, minimalist penthouse, once a testament to his success and isolation, had been subtly transformed. A bright blue beanbag chair, purchased by Sarah, sat in one corner. A colorful drawing by Leo was held by a magnet to the stainless steel refrigerator. They were small islands of warmth in an ocean of cool gray. Daniel paced the floor, adjusting his collar, smoothing his hair. Sarah stood by the window, a calm, reassuring presence. "She's going to love you, Daniel. Just be yourself, the self I know." When the doorbell rang, Daniel froze. Sarah gently touched his arm, giving him a supportive squeeze before she went to open it. And there she was, Emily. She was small for her age, with her mother's wary eyes and a cascade of dark hair. She clutched a worn, one-eyed teddy bear to her chest like a shield. She looked past Sarah, her eyes finding her father across the vast living room. The space between them felt like a mile-wide canyon. "Hi, sweetie," Daniel said, his voice cracking slightly. Emily just nodded, her grip tightening on the bear. The silence was deafening, filled with years of unspoken words, of missed birthdays and broken promises. Daniel's heart hammered against his ribs. This was it, the moment it all fell apart again. Then a small figure darted out from behind the sofa. It was Leo, holding his most prized possession, a gleaming Captain Valor action figure. He stopped a few feet from Emily, his head cocked with genuine curiosity. He saw not a complicated family history, but a new person, a potential friend. He walked forward, his superhero t-shirt bright against the muted tones of the apartment. He held out the action figure. "This is Captain Valor," Leo announced with the gravity only a 5-year-old can muster. "He's the strongest hero. He protects everyone." Emily stared at the action figure, then up at Leo's earnest, open face. The tension in her shoulders eased by a fraction. A tiny, hesitant smile touched her lips for the first time. She looked down at the bear in her arms. "This is Barnaby," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "He's very brave." Leo nodded seriously. "Captain Valor and Barnaby can be a team." And just like that, the ice shattered. Emily knelt, placing Barnaby on the polished floor, and Leo put Captain Valor beside him. The two children began to murmur to each other, creating a new world right there on the rug, a world free of adult regret and pain. Daniel looked across the room at Sarah, his eyes filled with a gratitude so profound it left him breathless. He saw it all in that one moment, his catastrophic failure and his improbable, miraculous second chance. The public redemption he had unknowingly craved had not happened in a boardroom filled with his peers. It was happening here, in the quiet of his home, witnessed by the woman who had taught him how to love and the child who had taught him how to play. He mouthed the words to her, a silent vow that echoed in the sacred space between them. "Thank you." The broken pieces of his life were finally, impossibly, beginning to form something new, something whole. The scent of crayons and warm, buttery popcorn filled the small living room, a comforting aroma that had become the backdrop to Daniel's new reality. It was a Tuesday evening, utterly ordinary, and for that reason utterly perfect. Leo and Emily were sprawled on the floor, their heads nearly touching as they collaborated on a sprawling drawing of a castle defended by a coalition of superheroes and princesses. A playful argument had just subsided over who got to use the glittery silver crayon, a dispute Emily had won with the quiet, unassailable logic of a 10-year-old. Sarah sat on the worn sofa, a half-finished mug of tea growing cold in her hands, watching them with a smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. The soft lamplight caught the gentle curve of her cheek, and in that simple, unguarded moment, Daniel felt a familiar ache in his chest. Not the hollow pain of loneliness he had known for years, but the overwhelming fullness of a love so profound it was almost terrifying. He had just come from the kitchen with a fresh bowl of popcorn, and he stopped in the doorway, an invisible observer of the world he now belonged to. This was it. This was everything. Not the soaring stock prices, not the boardroom victories, not the silent, cavernous penthouse that had once been his measure of success. It was this, the beautiful, chaotic, crayon-scented reality of a family, a chosen family, forged not from obligation, but from a moment of unexpected grace in a 5-star restaurant. He saw how Leo would occasionally glance up at Emily for approval on his coloring, and how Emily would gently guide his hand, a natural big sister. They were no longer Daniel's daughter and Sarah's son. They were simply Emily and Leo. They were siblings. His heart hammered against his ribs. He had been carrying the small velvet box in his coat pocket for 3 weeks, waiting for the perfect moment. He'd imagined grand gestures, a private dinner, a surprise trip, but he realized now that those grand gestures belonged to the old Daniel Thorne. The new one, the real one, belonged right here. "Sarah," he said, his voice softer than he intended. She looked up, her smile widening when she saw him. "More popcorn? You're going to spoil their dinner." He walked over, setting the bowl down on the coffee table, a move that earned him a synchronized cheer from the artists on the floor. But he didn't look at them. His eyes were fixed on Sarah. He reached into his coat, his fingers closing around the small box. "Sarah Jenkins," he began, and the sound of her full name, spoken with such reverence, made her sit up a little straighter. The children paused their drawing, their attention snagged by the sudden shift in the room's atmosphere. Daniel took a breath and slowly, deliberately, lowered himself to one knee on the slightly threadbare rug. Right there, between the sofa and a pile of colorful construction paper, he knelt. Sarah's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes widening in disbelief. A soft gasp escaped her lips. "I spent half my life building an empire," Daniel said, his voice thick with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. "I built it with steel and glass and ruthless ambition. And when I got to the top, I was completely, utterly alone. I thought that was the price of success. Then, one night, I got a text message from a woman I'd never met, a woman who was about to cancel a date because her life was messy and complicated and real." Tears were already welling in Sarah's eyes, shimmering in the lamplight. Leo and Emily watched, silent and wide-eyed, sensing the gravity of the moment. "You could have lied, Sarah. You could have made an excuse, but you didn't. You told the truth. You offered me your beautiful, complicated life, complete with its most precious responsibility. You brought Leo." He glanced at the boy, who was now staring at him with a mixture of confusion and awe. "You walked into that restaurant, and you were so worried that you didn't belong. But the truth is, Sarah, I was the one who didn't belong, not until you showed me how. That night, you weren't a mistake or a flaw. You were the key. You were the profound, unexpected key that unlocked my heart and let me be a father again. You saved me." He opened the box. Inside, a simple, elegant diamond sat on a slender platinum band. It wasn't a garish statement of his wealth. It was a quiet promise of his devotion. "I don't want to build empires anymore," he whispered, his gaze locked with hers. "I just want to build a life. With you, with Leo, with Emily. Will you marry me, Sarah? Will you let me spend the rest of my days being grateful for the woman who was brave enough to bring her son on a first date?" For a moment, the only sound was the quiet hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. Then a single tear traced a path down Sarah's cheek, and she nodded, unable to speak. She nodded again, a sob of pure joy escaping her. "Yes," she finally breathed out. "Oh, Daniel, yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit. And as he stood to pull her into his arms, the spell was broken. Leo let out a whoop. "You're gonna be my new dad," he exclaimed, launching himself at Daniel's legs in a fierce hug. Emily, more reserved but beaming, wrapped her arms around Sarah's waist, burying her face in her side. And there in the middle of the living room, surrounded by the beautiful, messy evidence of their life, they became one. A family, officially, bound by a love that had found its roots in the most unlikely of soils. Their wedding was not a society event chronicled in business journals. It was a sun-drenched afternoon in a botanical garden, attended by a small circle of friends and family who had witnessed their journey. Leo, impossibly serious in a tiny tuxedo, served as the ring-bearer, while Emily, in a pale yellow dress, walked ahead of Sarah, scattering white rose petals with solemn grace. When it was time for the vows, Daniel took both of Sarah's hands in his. He looked out at their guests, but his words were only for her. "Most of you have known me as a businessman," he began, his voice clear and steady, "a man who deals in numbers and forecasts. But today, I want to talk about the single greatest investment I ever made. It happened on a Friday night. I was about to have dinner with a woman I thought I needed to impress, but she changed the terms of the deal. He smiled, squeezing her hands. She showed up with her 5-year-old son. She showed up with her whole heart, her whole life on display. And in doing so, she taught me that true love doesn't demand that you hide your responsibilities or your scars. It doesn't ask you to be less than what you are. True love, real love, asks for all of it. It asks for the messy parts, the tired parts, the parts that don't fit into a perfect picture, because it knows that's where the real beauty is. He turned his gaze fully to her, his eyes glistening. Sarah, you didn't just save me. You showed me what was worth saving. I vow to honor the courage you showed that night every day for the rest of our lives. I vow to be a father to our children and a partner to you, worthy of the incredible gift you have given me. A home. When it was her turn, Sarah's voice trembled with a strength no one had ever heard from her before. I spent a long time believing I was invisible, she said, looking directly into his eyes. Just a single mom trying to keep her head above water. I walked into that restaurant expecting judgment, or at best, pity. And then, you knelt. You knelt for my son. In that moment, you saw more than a single mother and her child. You saw us. You saw me. Daniel, you were the first person to see my entire world not as a burden, but as a treasure. And I promised to spend my life treasuring yours in return. Later, as the sun began to set, casting long golden shadows across the lawn, the four of them stood together, watching their guests dance. Leo was leaning sleepily against Daniel's side, while Emily held Sarah's hand, her head resting on her arm. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, because their life was more real and more wonderful than any fairy tale. It was a beginning, built on the understanding that the most profound redemption starts not with grand gestures, but with a single act of unexpected kindness. It starts with the courage to welcome all of life's beautiful, unpredictable truths, weaving every existing bond, every old scar and new joy into a vibrant, resilient tapestry of a future stronger and more beautiful than either of them could have ever imagined.